The transport pod hit the docking arm with a sound like a rifle shot. I grabbed the overhead rail before I even thought about it. Old reflex. Kepler 9 reflex. My father's voice in the back of my head said brace before it stops moving, and then the doors opened and I stepped out into Harith Station. Nobody was there to meet me. That was fine. I did not need a welcome party. I needed a locker, a training schedule, and 12 hours of sleep that was never going to happen. The corridor was wide enough to park two vehicles side by side. The ceiling was 4 meters up. Every surface was gray-white and smooth, lit by panels that buzzed just low enough to feel in the back of your teeth. I walked down the center of it with my kit bag over one shoulder and my assignment papers in my hand, and I was the smallest thing in the whole station. I had known I would be. I had prepared for it. Preparation does not make you ready, it just means you saw it coming. The first cadet I passed was Kethel. 3 meters of layered exoskeleton and dense muscle, moving down the corridor toward me like a slow vehicle. His eyes, 4 of them arranged in a band across the front of his face, tracked me without his head moving. He did not slow down. He did not say anything. He looked at me the way a person looks at something that does not quite fit in the space it is occupying, and then he kept walking. I kept walking too. The second cadet I passed was another Kethel. Same size, same expression, same slow, tracking eyes. By the third one I had filed the experience under expected and stopped paying attention to it. Orientation was held in a room built for 40 bodies that were not mine. The chairs were wide enough that I could have sat cross-legged in one and still had room at both sides. The table at the front of the room held a data terminal, 3 water containers, and a sealed ration pack. One of the water containers was green, the same shade as my father's coffee thermos, the one he carried on every early morning shift, the one that was sitting in my kit bag right now, at the bottom, underneath everything else. I looked at that container for 1 second. Then I sat down. There were 11 other cadets in orientation, 10 Kethel and 1 Vorathi. The Vorathi was smaller than the Kethel, which meant he was still roughly twice my mass, and he tilted his head when I sat down with the look of someone doing arithmetic that was not going the way he expected. They all looked at me when I came in, not hostile, not welcoming. They looked at me the way scientists look at data that does not support the current model. I sat in the chair that was too big and put my papers on the table and waited. Vethkara came in at exactly the scheduled time. That was the first thing I noticed about him. He was punctual. He was Kethel and senior instructor rank, which meant the plates along his upper arms had gone pale with age and his movements had settled into the kind of deliberate slowness that was not age but weight. He carried a data slate in one hand and he did not look at the room when he entered. He looked at the terminal. He pulled up our files. He began to read. He called each cadet by name, made a note, moved on. He got to mine last. He read my intake physical data aloud, not because the others needed to hear it, because the room was the room and Vethkara was the kind of instructor who believed that relevant data belonged to everyone present. Bone density, low by Kethel standard. Muscle fiber yield, below combat threshold by coalition metric. Cardiovascular ceiling, acceptable for support personnel. He read each line evenly, without pause, without comment, and the room did not react because they did not need to. The numbers had done it already. He set down his data slate. He said, in a flat and formal way that told me he had said this kind of thing before and expected to say it again, "You are what your species is. Fragile architecture. The coalition combat track was not designed to accommodate your limitations. It was designed to exceed them. You will find, cadet, that the gap between those two things is where you will live for the foreseeable future." Silence. I looked at the green water container behind him, the color of it, the exact shade, the way the station lighting caught the upper edge of it. I said, "Sure, okay." More silence. Vethkara looked at me for the first time, not curious, assessing, the way you look at a measurement that came back wrong when you are deciding whether to recalibrate the equipment or trust the result. He held the look for 3 seconds. Then he moved on. He assigned our training regimens before the session ended. Standard Kethel load for everyone. He did not create a modified version for me. He did not offer one. He handed me the same sheet he handed the 3-meter cadet to my left, who could have used me as a training weight without inconveniencing himself. I read the numbers. I thought about Kepler 9, about 1.4 standard gravity and morning drills, and my father's voice counting reps from somewhere behind me in the gray pre-dawn, about what that kind of constant weight does to a person over 26 years, about the small, confused pause Earth standard doctors always made before my bone density results, that brief recalibration when the number did not fit the person standing in front of them. I folded the sheet and put it in my pocket. "Sure, okay," I said to nobody in particular, to the shape the words made in the air. Outside in the corridor, one of the Kethel cadets fell into step beside me, not close, just in the same direction. He was young by Kethel standards, which meant he was enormous by mine, and he moved at his own pace and did not adjust for my stride length. I had to take 3 steps to his 1. After a while he said, "You will not last the first week." I considered this. "You are probably right," I said. He nodded once, turned left at the next junction, and was gone. I found my quarters, a standard room that had been fitted with a smaller bunk and a lower shelf unit for a human frame. Someone had done that in advance. I did not know who. I put my kit bag on the floor and sat on the edge of the bunk and looked at the wall and thought about the training schedule in my pocket. The numbers were not impossible. That was not the same as saying they were reasonable. I reached into my bag and put my father's thermos on the shelf beside the bunk. I did not open it. I lay down and looked at the ceiling and did not sleep for a long time. In the morning, Vethkara's training program was waiting. I started it. The first week, I broke 3 fingernails, sprained 1 wrist, and collected a row of bruises along both shins from equipment calibrated for frames that were not mine. I kept count in the back of my head, not of the injuries, of the sessions completed. 7 days, 21 sessions, each one finished. I want to be honest about how I finished them, not cleanly, not gracefully. I finished them the way water finishes moving through a crack in stone, not because it is elegant but because that is what water does. It keeps going until it gets through. There is no strategy in it. There is only continuation. The training bay on Harith Station was enormous. The ceilings were high enough that I had never seen the tops of them through the upper ventilation haze. The equipment was built for Kethel frames. Resistance bars thicker than my forearm. Loading sleds that started at 400 kilos and scaled up from there. Grip handles spaced for hands that were not human hands, spread at distances that required me to modify my hold on every single station. I adjusted what I could reach. For the rest, I found a way to make do. Vethkara watched the morning sessions from the observation platform above the bay floor. He was there every day with his data slate and his measuring stillness, and I learned in the first 3 days to stop looking up at him. Looking up changed nothing. He was going to be there. The numbers were going to be whatever they were. The only useful thing was the equipment in front of me. On day 4, I was running the resistance circuit when someone slowed behind me, not stopping, slowing. I did not turn around. I moved to the overhead pull bar, set my grip, and started the set. When I finished and stepped back, the Kethel cadet from the corridor, the one who had said I would not last the week, was at the station to my right. He was running his own set. He had not been there a minute before. He was there now. He did not speak. He worked through the movement. When he finished, he moved to the next station, which happened to be the same station I was heading for. This continued for the rest of the session. I looked up his name in the cadet roster that evening. Orath, 2nd year, evaluation rating in the top 4 of his cohort. His file had a note at the bottom that said observational tendency, collects data before engaging. I read that note twice. Fair enough, I thought. We are not so different then. The second week, Vethkara updated my training load. He came down from the platform midway through Tuesday's session, the first time he had walked onto the bay floor since orientation. He crossed the space with that heavy, deliberate walk and stopped beside my current station. He looked at his slate. He said, "You are performing adequately given your limitations." He said it the way a doctor says a test result is not alarming but requires monitoring. Measured. Informational. He then adjusted the resistance settings on 3 of my stations, up by 30% each, without asking and without explaining. Then he said, "We will determine whether adequacy is sustainable." He went back to the platform. I stood at the first adjusted station and looked at the new setting. 3 stations, 30% each. I thought about the word adequate, about the phrase given your limitations, about how those 3 words had been sitting in the back of my teeth since he first used them, like a splinter that was too small to grip and too present to ignore. I set my hands on the bar. I started. The 3rd week, the Vorathi cadet from orientation came to sit across from me at my usual spot in the meal hall. His name was Preth, and he had a habit of tilting his head when thinking that gave him the look of a very large bird working through a complicated math problem. He sat down across from me and did not eat. He just sat there. After a while he said, "There is a support track orientation session next week. The transfer window is still open." He said it carefully, with consideration, the way you say something to a person when you have decided that being honest with them is a kindness regardless of whether they will receive it that way. I looked at him. 4 arms, mostly jaw, eyes that were trying hard to communicate that this was not an insult. "Thank you," I said. "I appreciate that." I finished my entire meal. The portions at Harith Station were sized for Kethel cadets, which meant every meal was approximately double what I could comfortably eat in one sitting. I ate all of it. Preth watched me finish the last of it with an expression I could not fully translate. "You are very strange," he said at last. "Yes," I said, "I know." He tilted his head the other way, clearly still processing, and then went to get his own food. That night I ran the after-session perimeter route through the station's inner corridor loop. It was a standard cool-down run, 800 meters at recovery pace, nothing remarkable about it. On the 4th corridor, the one that ran along the outer hull section, there was a viewport, a long horizontal window that looked out over the south face of the station into open space. I ran past it. I knew what I would see if I slowed down. I knew which direction of space I would be looking at. I knew that Kepler 9 was not visible from this side of the station. I knew all of that. I had calculated it the first day when I mapped the station layout. I knew that already. I kept running. By the end of week 3, Oreth had stopped pretending he was at the same stations by coincidence. He sat on the bench near the pull bar and worked his own drills, but his eyes tracked my sets with the counting attention of someone building a very specific picture. I did not mind it. I had been doing the same thing to myself since day 1. The second change, Vethkara had come down from the platform again. Not at the start of a session. Midway through the loading sled work, I moved to my station and the resistance was wrong. Too high, by a margin that made me stop and look at the settings before I touched the handles. I looked up. He was on the platform with his slate. I picked up the handles. I pushed. The sled moved. He made a note. He had not made a note at this station for any other cadet that week. They were performing within expected parameters. Notes were for anomalies. I was apparently an anomaly. At the end of the session, he came down a 3rd time. He stood at the edge of the training space and read my session numbers aloud, against the Kethel standard metrics. He paused at the end. "Your bone density is atypical," he said. "Yes," I said. "Significantly denser than the human standard listed in your intake file." "Intake files use Earth standard," I said. "I am not Earth standard." He looked at me, the same measuring quality as orientation day, but there was a difference in it now, something that had not been present before. It was not warmth. It was not admiration. It was the specific expression of a scientist encountering data that does not fit the model and who has not yet decided whether the model needs updating or the instrument needs recalibration. He said nothing else. He went back to the platform. I picked up my kit bag. Behind me, Oreth was still on his bench. He had stopped working his drills entirely. He was sitting with his arms on his knees looking at the bay door I had just walked through, and the expression on his face was one I had not seen on a Kethel before. I found out later through Preth, who had a gift for cross-species emotional translation, that the Kethel had a word for it that meant roughly, the disorientation of discovering that the universe has been operating on rules you did not know existed. That felt accurate. The fourth week, Vethkara announced the anchor test. He did it Monday morning at the start of the session, standing at the front of the bay while we stretched. He outlined the format without theater: strength evaluation, load carry, impact resistance, simulated engagement, all graded at Kethel standard, all recorded, all public. He posted the passing metrics on the bay board and stepped back without looking at me. The implied message was considerate in its way: a clean exit, a face-saving path, take the support track transfer. Nobody would need to say anything. The numbers would say it for you. I read the list. I read it twice. Sure, okay, I said to myself. Oreth was 2 stations over and his hearing was better than mine, and he turned his head a fraction in my direction, not commenting, nodding. I started my warm-up. The anchor test was in 1 week. 1 week was enough, not because I was certain of the outcome, because I did not have any other option, and sometimes the absence of options is the cleanest possible freedom. I hit the first station. Given your limitations. I kept going. The bay was empty at midnight. That was why I went at midnight. The training lights were on half power, which gave the whole space a flat gray quality, the look of a place that had not been abandoned but had not been occupied in a little while. Equipment stood in rows in the low light. The loading sleds, the resistance frames, the grip bars and harness rigs, all of it, standing still and patient in the dark as though waiting for morning. I liked it better this way. No observers, no data slates from the platform, no Preth with his tilted head or Oreth cataloging my form, just me and the room and whatever I was going to do with the next 2 hours. I put my kit bag on the bench near the door. I took out my hand wraps and started working them around my knuckles the way my father had taught me, tight on the palm, loose on the fingers, firm across the wrist. He was very precise about hand wraps. He called it respect for the equipment. You take care of your hands and the hands take care of the work, and then the work gets done. I had been wrapping my hands this way since I was 9 years old. I finished the left, started the right. The bay door opened. I did not turn around. The weight of the footsteps told me who it was before I needed to look. Oreth moved with a particular rhythm, heavier in the heel on the left side from an old knee injury he never mentioned and I had never asked about. He came in and let the door close behind him, and he did not say anything. He crossed to the bench at the far end of the row and sat down. I finished wrapping my right hand. I went to the resistance bar station at Kethel standard setting and set my grip and pulled the bar through a full set, slow and controlled, not warming up for the morning but reminding myself of the shape of the movement. My body had been doing this since I was 8 years old on a colony world that made everything heavier. It remembered. I was just checking in. After the set, I stepped back. Oreth said, "Your numbers do not make sense." "I know," I said. "In the intake file," he said, "the standard human metrics listed there. A cadet with those numbers cannot do what I have been watching you do for 4 weeks." "No," I agreed, "they cannot." "So the file is wrong." "The file is accurate for Earth standard," I said. "I grew up on Kepler 9. It is a colony world, higher gravity, about 1.4 standard." "Silence," he said, slowly and carefully, in the way he said things when he was laying out a calculation in real time. "You grew up at 1.4 standard gravity." "My whole life," I said. "My father ran a marine training facility there. We never went to Earth. Earth standard gravity felt like walking in a dream the few times I visited. Too light, wrong in the joints." Oreth was quiet for a long moment. "Your bones," he said, "your muscle fiber density, your cardiovascular ceiling. All built in 1.4, I said. "The intake file compares me to an Earth human. That is not what I am. He went quiet again, longer this time. Then he made a sound, low and rumbling, from somewhere deep in his chest. I had heard it once before in this same bay at a different hour. Now it was louder and it had a settled quality to it, like something that had been trying to resolve and had finally resolved. I went back to the equipment. I worked through the stations that would appear in the morning's test, not pushing, not proving anything to the empty room, just moving through each one, letting the body find its form, letting the muscle memory settle. The loading sled, the grip frames, the harness rig. I ran the movements the same way I had run them every morning for 4 weeks, the same way I had run them as a child on Kepler 9 while the gravity pressed down on everything and my father's voice counted in the background. At some point, I became aware that my kit bag was on the bench, and my father's thermos was on top of the bag. I had put it there when I packed. I had not thought about it. I reached in for the wraps and my hand found the thermos and I picked it up and it came with me when I walked to the bay. It was on the bench now, green and scratched and weighted the way he had chosen it to be. I had not opened it. I moved to the impact sled station, the padded resistance frame on a locked rail, designed to record the force of a full-body collision at combat speed. The passing metric for the test was 1,200 kilos of force. The average Kethel cadet at full sprint produced around 1,400. My best recorded number from the practice sessions Orath had been quietly observing was 1,140. 60 short of passing. I stood at the starting mark, 20 meters from the sled, standard approach distance. I thought about nothing. That was the technique my father had spent years trying to teach me and years watching me fail to learn. Right before the thing that matters, he said, you have to empty the room, not think about the goal, not run the outcome in your head. Empty. You make space and the body fills it. The mind getting involved is the part that costs you. I had finally learned it at age 22, alone in a gym on a transit station between here and somewhere else, the night before something that had not gone well and that I was not going to think about right now. I emptied the room. I ran. 30 meters at full acceleration on a high-gravity colony body is different from 30 meters on a standard human body. It is slower at the start. My stride was shorter. My center of gravity sat lower. I had never been built for speed. I was built for force, the accumulated specific physics of 26 years in 1.4 standard, and that force needed distance to express itself properly. I hit the sled. The rail system took it. The sensor array recorded the impact. The number appeared on the display panel. 1,218. I stood back. Orath read the number from where he was sitting. Then he read it again. Then he looked at me with that expression I had started to think of as his counting face. You were at 1140 last week, he said. Yes, I said. What changed? I thought about this honestly. Nothing changed, I said. I stopped thinking about it. He nodded, long and slow, the kind of nod that meant there was more happening beneath the surface of it than the nod itself could express. I collected my kit bag. I picked up the thermos without looking at it and put it back inside. Then I stood up and shouldered the bag. The test is in 11 hours, Orath said. Yes, I said. You should sleep. Yes, I said. I went to the door. At the door I stopped, not because of anything significant, just because a question had been sitting in my mind for 4 weeks, and I had not seen a reason to ask it until right now. I turned back. Why do you come here when I am in the bay? I said. Orath looked at me, then at the impact sled, then back at me. For 3 weeks I told myself your numbers were wrong, he said. That what I was observing could not be accurate by any reasonable reading of the available data. He paused. I wanted to be close enough to see what not possible looked like, so I could understand why I was wrong about it. I thought about that. Is it what you expected? I said. The rumbling sound, quiet this time. No, he said. It is completely ordinary from the outside. You look like someone doing their work. The numbers only stop making sense after when you compare them to what the work was supposed to produce. That is how it usually goes, I said. I went back to my quarters. The thermos went on the shelf. I lay down on the bunk and looked at the ceiling and said nothing to the room. In the morning, the anchor test was waiting. I had decided to be accurate. That was the whole plan. That was enough. The arena at Harith Station was built for spectacle. There was no other reason for the ceiling height. 6 meters of clearance was not a functional requirement for a combat evaluation. It was a historical one. The Kethel, for as long as they had been training soldiers, had wanted their best cadets to move at full capacity in front of a room that could see them properly. The observation galleries on 3 levels were full. I had not expected them to be full. Preth, who had managed to position himself beside me in the staging area through a combination of social maneuvering and his general habit of being wherever information was about to happen, leaned down and said in a low voice, "Word spread. Everyone knows about the human on the combat track." I looked up at the galleries. Kethel, Vorathi, Sulla, staff members I recognized from the administrative level, a group near the upper tier that had the collective look of people who had argued about a decision and were now here to see whether they had been right. "Real cute," I said. "What does that mean?" Preth said. "It means I see them and I am filing it away," I said. He made his sympathetic sound and went to find his position in the staging order. Vethkara came in from the east corridor at the precise scheduled time. He crossed the arena floor with his data slate in hand and his uniform exact, and his expression identical to every morning on the platform. He took his position at the evaluation terminal and addressed the room without preamble. He explained the test format. He read the passing metrics. He announced the evaluation order. I was last. The gallery settled into the particular quiet of a room that has made its decision to pay attention. The Kethel cadets went first. They were good. Watching them was like watching machinery perform the function it was designed for. Every number they produced sat in the range it was supposed to sit in. The room received each result with the quiet satisfaction of expectations confirmed. I watched from staging and thought about my hand wraps, whether the left wrist was tight enough. It was fine. I had checked it 4 times before leaving my quarters that morning. Preth ran his Vorathi evaluation. He passed without trouble and caught my eye on the way back to staging with a small nod that I chose to interpret generously. Vethkara called my name. I walked onto the arena floor. The galleries were very still, that specific directed stillness that has actual weight. Vethkara read my intake data aloud. The same data from orientation day. The same numbers: bone density, muscle fiber yield, cardiovascular ceiling. He read them without emphasis and without commentary, and the room received them with the same quiet the data always produced when you read those numbers about a human standing in a Kethel combat facility. "Evaluation will be conducted at Kethel standard," he said. "No modifications requested or granted. Begin at the load carry station." The load carry was a weighted shoulder harness at 500 kilos, run for 300 meters around the arena perimeter. Kethel cadets averaged just under 4 minutes. Passing metric was 6. I got the harness on, the weight settled. Right, okay, there it is. I ran. Not the way the Kethel ran. I did not have their stride or their speed. I ran the way I always ran, low and forward-leaning. Weight distributed the way my father had spent years getting into my muscle memory. The weight that was never not there because on Kepler 9 weight was simply what the world felt like. This was not different. This was familiar. 4 minutes 32 seconds. I racked the harness without drama and moved to the resistance stations. The resistance bar, the grip frame, the tension cable array. I worked through each one without rushing. My numbers were not Kethel numbers. They were not supposed to be. They were accurate representations of what I was built from. I was not performing for the gallery. I was being accurate. That was the decision I had made the night before, and I was keeping it. Station 4, the loading sled. 400 kilos, 3 repetitions at full extension. I moved the sled. From the upper gallery, someone made a sound. Small and contained, the involuntary sound of a recalculation producing an unexpected result. Vethkara made a note on his slate. He had not made a note at Station 4 for any other cadet. Expected performance did not require notes. Notes were for anomalies. I moved to Station 5. Station 6 was grip strength assessment. I had been quietly confident about this one since I first read the test format, because grip strength developed in high-gravity environments does not map to grip strength at standard gravity, and the coalition metrics had not been updated to reflect the difference. I set my hands on the handles and ran the assessment. The result was 4 positions above passing. Above, not below. The murmur that moved through the upper gallery was not loud. It was the sound of a collective recalculation happening in real time. Vethkara came down from the evaluation terminal. He walked to my station and looked at the panel and then looked at his slate and then at the panel again. "Your grip density reading is not consistent with your intake file," he said. "No," I agreed. "It is significantly higher." "Intake files use Earth Standard," I said. "I am not Earth Standard." He looked at me with the model updating expression. The data does not match expression. But there was something added to it now, a quality that had not been present before, something that existed in a category that was not scientific and that he was clearly not comfortable nomming. He went back to the terminal. "Final station," he said. "Impact resistance, simulated combat engagement, evaluator assisted." For the final station, the senior instructor ran the resistance frame in person. He had done it for every cadet that morning. It was a controlled drill. You approached at combat speed, made contact, the force was recorded. Standard procedure. For every cadet before me, he had stood behind the frame. For me, he stepped in front of it. He walked to the end of the approach lane, 3 meters of Kethel mass and 22 years of training. He set his stance. His feet shoulder-width apart, his center of gravity low, his exoskeleton-plated arms slightly forward. He was the frame. He was the end of the lane. He was the wall. I stood at the starting mark 20 meters away. The gallery was not just quiet now. It was the kind of silence that only exists when a room is collectively holding something it cannot name. Vethkara looked at me across the distance. I remembered his exact words from the first day. The phrase he had chosen for me in a room full of cadets and confirmed data, and a green water container that was the color of a thermos I carried everywhere and never opened. Fragile architecture. I emptied the room. No gallery, no terminal, no preth in staging, no thermos on a shelf, no numbers on a board, no cold coffee and no Tuesday morning and no equipment locker and no form waiting at the end of a week to be filled out. Nothing. Just 20 meters and the end of it. I ran. The approach built the way it always built in a body calibrated for 1.4 standard. Slow at first, longer than it looked to reach full expression. My stride was short. My center of gravity was low. Everything my entire life had made me was organizing itself into the last 3 meters of that lane. I hit him at full sprint. For a fraction of a second the contact held, his stance, his training, his mass. 15 years of being an immovable object in this room, all of it resisting. Then it did not hold. He went through the wall. Not the way it sounds in a story. The way physics says it goes. The reinforced partition at the end of the approach lane was rated for training impact. It was not rated for that specific input, from that specific direction, from a body that had spent 26 years being shaped by a world that the rating system had never considered. The partition gave at the lower left corner, and he went through it into the equipment storage corridor on the other side, and then he stopped. The arena was absolutely silent. I completed my follow-through, both feet, weight transferred, hands open, balance. I stood and waited. From the storage corridor, a shifting, settling sound. The sound of a very large and solid person taking a moment to locate themselves. Then footsteps, heavy, deliberate. The steps of someone who is not hurt but is being accurate about their movement. Vithkara stepped back through the hole in the wall. Dust on his uniform. A long pale mark across his left shoulder plate where the partition material had caught the edge of his exoskeleton. Data slate still in his right hand. He looked at me. I looked at him. From somewhere in the upper gallery, from the back section where the Kethel cadets had been watching all morning, a sound started, low and rolling and building. Orath. I recognized the particular quality of it from the Midnight Bay, but louder now. And then others were joining it, other Kethel voices adding to it, because what had just happened did not need translation in any language spoken in that room. Vethkara looked at his data slate for a long moment, then at me, then back at the slate. He walked to the evaluation terminal. The same unhurried, heavy walk, dust on his uniform. He entered the final impact reading into the record. He addressed the room. "Evaluation complete," he said. "Results will be posted within the hour." That was all. The sound from the gallery was still building when I picked up my kit bag from the staging area. I walked out of the arena. In the corridor outside, I stopped and put my back against the wall and breathed, not because I was overwhelmed, just because the corridor was quiet and I had earned 20 seconds of quiet and I was going to take them. The ceiling here was barely 2.5 meters, normal height for a secondary corridor, built for whatever this section had originally been. Almost right for me. I pushed off the wall. I kept walking. The medical bay had a chair in it that was the right size for me. Not modified, not an adjusted Kethel unit with added supports, an actual properly sized chair, the kind that had been made for a human body, placed near the far wall like it had always been there. I noticed it when the medical staff directed me to wait while they finished with Vethkara in the next room. I sat down in it. The seat height was right. My feet rested flat on the floor without me having to adjust. I was going to think more about that chair later, about who had ordered it made and when and what that said about how long someone had been planning for this. But not right now. Right now I listened to the low voices on the other side of the wall. Medical Kethel working through their assessment, calm and systematic, the sounds of instruments and the quiet exchange of data. Nothing urgent in the tone. No tension. He was fine. He was Kethel. The partition had not done the damage. If anything, the partition had absorbed enough energy that the corridor floor had absorbed the rest without issue. I had not been trying to hurt him. I want to be clear about that because in the hours and days after the test, a great many things were said and recorded and sent up channels to people who make decisions about things, and a significant portion of those things missed that particular point. I was not angry in that lane. I was not making a statement about human capability or coalition intake policy or anything else that required a capital letter. I was being accurate. That was the whole of it. The door opened, and a Kethel medical staffer told me Vethkara had some bruising on the shoulder plate and would like to speak with me when I was ready. "Now is fine," I said. He was on the edge of the medical frame when I came in. Uniform changed. No more dust. Data slate in his lap. His expression was what it always was, contained and present and entirely itself, and he watched me cross the room and sit in the chair across from him without changing it. He looked at his slate. "I have spent the last 2 hours reviewing your complete file against the physical data from this morning," he said. "What did you find?" I asked. "A significant error," he said. "Not in the instruments, in the assumption the instruments were built on." He set the slate on the surface beside him. "All coalition combat metrics for human candidates are calibrated to Earth standard physiological baseline. That baseline covers approximately 60% of the human population. It does not account for colony-born humans from environments above 1.2 standard gravity." "No," I said, "it does not. Kepler 9 is in the colonial registry as a low-priority settlement. Population under 200,000. No significant strategic value noted. The intake processing system flagged you as standard human. Nobody reviewed the colony of origin. I know, I said. You knew this when you arrived. Yes. You did not correct the file. I thought about the first morning, the orientation room, the green water container, the numbers being read aloud to a room that did not need to say anything because the numbers said it for them. No, I said, I did not correct it. He was quiet for a moment. Why not? I thought about my father, about something he used to say on the mornings after hard sessions on Kepler 9, when the body was tired and the work was done, and the results were sitting there in front of you. He used to say the gap between what something looks like and what it actually is, that gap is where everything interesting happens. He thought the gap was important. He thought disappearing into it was how you learned the most about yourself. I wanted to see what the wrong assumption produced, I said. Vethkara looked at me for a long time. Fragile architecture, he said. Yes, I said. I was wrong, he said. Not an apology. Vethkara did not work in apologies the way humans meant them. This was a correction, a hypothesis updated in response to new data. He was built for that kind of honesty, and it was the most he was capable of, and it was exactly enough. You are not fragile architecture, he said. You are load-bearing. I sat with that for a moment, the two words settling. My father would have liked that, I said. I had not planned to say it. Vethkara tilted his head, a very small amount. Your father was military, he said. It was not a question. Yes, I said. Kepler 9 Colonial Marine Corps. Yes. A pause. He is listed as deceased in your file, he said. He said it with the careful precision of someone who understands that the data carries weight beyond the data. Yes, I said. He did not ask anything more. He understood what that answer was, and he respected it by not filling in the space around it. That was the most I could have asked from him, and he did it without needing to be asked. He picked up his data slate. I will be submitting a formal recommendation to the Coalition Intake Office, he said, to revise the standard assessment protocol for colony-born human candidates from high-gravity environments above 1.2 standard gravity. The current system produces inaccurate baseline measurements. Inaccurate measurements produce wrong conclusions. I do not work with wrong conclusions. I know, I said. He looked up from the slate. You will continue on the combat track, he said. Your evaluation results were sufficient. He paused. More than sufficient. 3 words from Vethkara were the equivalent of a lengthy formal commendation from anyone else, and I knew it, and I let it mean what it meant. Thank you, I said. He nodded once and returned to his work, which was the Kethel way of indicating that the conversation had concluded and there were things to do, and I stood and moved to the door. Cadet Voss, he said. I stopped. The wall, he said, was that a measured strike? I thought about midnight, the impact sled, 1218, Oreth on the bench, the thermos on top of the kit bag. Yes, I said. He made a note. I went out into the corridor. Oreth was standing against the far wall with his arms crossed in the way that meant he had been there for a while and was not going to acknowledge that he had been waiting. I stopped in front of him and we looked at each other. Your numbers make sense now, he said. Yes, I said. Kepler 9, 1.4 standard gravity. He said it the way someone says something they have been working through for the last 2 hours. The gravity accumulates in the bone. The muscle fiber adapts. The cardiovascular system builds a larger baseline ceiling over time. Yes, I said. Your father ran a training facility there. I looked at him. I had not told him that part. You researched me, I said. You were an anomaly, he said. I research anomalies. I thought about that. About my file sitting in the Coalition database under low-priority settlement and no significant strategic value. What did you find? I said. That the Kepler 9 Colonial Marine Corps trained in full kit at 1.4 standard gravity for 4 continuous years before the expansion mission deployment, he said. That the commanding officer of that corps was named Voss. Yes, I said. We stood in the corridor outside the medical bay. The station hum was in the walls. Somewhere further down the corridor, voices and movement, the ordinary sounds of a facility that had just watched something unexpected and was now processing it the way institutions process unexpected things, through documentation and discussion and a great many forms. Orath looked at me. Your father's numbers, he said. His planets, I said. He nodded, long and slow and complete. Then he straightened up from the wall and turned toward the main corridor junction. I fell into step beside him, one of his strides to every two of mine. We walked to the meal hall. Preth was already there, which was not surprising because Preth had a talent for being wherever the information was before the information finished traveling. He looked at me and then at Orath, and then at the tray I was building and said, carefully, "The results are posted." "I know," I said. "You passed," he said. "I know," I said. "In most of the categories," he said, "the margin was significant." "Preth," I said. "Yes. Thank you for telling me about the support track transfer window." He blinked all four eyes in sequence. "You are welcome. I was trying to help." "You were," I said. "It helped me decide." He processed this with his head tilted at the angle that meant he was genuinely uncertain what to do with new information. And then he made his version of the rumbling sound, softer and less certain, but in the same register, and went back to his meal. The rest of that day was forms and debrief sessions, and a meeting with the administrative group from the upper gallery that lasted nearly an hour and covered the arena wall damage, the evaluation data, and the intake protocol question. The senior administrator was a Sulla, which meant she had four eyes on stalks, and a method of listening that involved her entire upper body leaning slightly forward. She listened through the whole meeting with that forward lean, and at the end she was quiet for a moment and then she said, "We will need to update the assessment process." "Yes," I said, "you will." The formal record of my anchor test was filed that evening. Vethkara submitted his protocol revision recommendation at the same time. I did not read it directly, but Preth, who had access to the administrative data channel and was not above using that access when he felt the information was worth having, told me later that the recommendation was 11 pages. Detailed and systematic and supported by 30 years of collected training data and a single morning's revised understanding of what the data had been missing. That was Vethkara. When he updated a model, he updated it entirely. I went back to my quarters that night. The station was doing what it always did, cadets in corridors and equipment running in the bay and the low, steady hum of the life systems in the walls. But my quarters were my quarters, and I closed the door and sat on the edge of the bunk and let the room be quiet. The thermos was on the shelf, green and scratched, and present in the way it was always present. I had put it there the first night and it had stayed 5 weeks. It had been in the bay at midnight and come back to the shelf. It had been on the bench while I worked through the stations and come back to the shelf. It was on the shelf now. I picked it up. It was heavier than it looked. It always had been. My father had chosen it for that reason specifically, because he did not trust containers that felt empty when they were full. He said that was a design failure and also a philosophical problem, and he intended to avoid both simultaneously. The body of it was dark green and scratched from years of kit bags and equipment room surfaces, and 100 different places that had not been careful with it. He had carried it every morning he was on Kepler 9. He put it in his locker when a mission started because he believed you kept your morning routines separate from the work itself. He had always planned to drink the coffee when he got back. He had filled it on a Tuesday. I turned the seal. It released with a small sound, a pressure equalization, air that had been held for 3 years finally moving. Inside, cold coffee. Kepler 9 blend, dark and bitter because Kepler 9 had less sun than it needed, and the plants that grew there had adapted by concentrating everything they had. My father used to say the plants were like the people. Less sun, so you learn to make the most of what is available. I breathed in the smell of it once. Then I walked to the utility basin in the corner of the room, and I poured it out. It went down the drain slowly. Dark. The smell of it filled the room for a moment, present and specific and real, and then it began to fade. I set the thermos on the shelf. The shelf where it had been for 5 weeks. The shelf where it would stay. I stood in front of it for a moment. The room was quiet enough that I could hear the station hum in the walls and my own breathing and nothing else. He had filled it on a Tuesday morning. Standard pre-mission routine. Same as every Tuesday before a deployment. He left it in his locker with the full intention of coming back to it. That was the thing about my father. He was always planning to come back. He planned it with such complete certainty that he left things waiting for him everywhere. Coffee in a thermos. A training schedule taped to the bay wall at home. A chair at the table. He had not come back. I had taken the thermos from his locker when they gave me his effects at the end of the week. I had not taken it because of the coffee. I had taken it because it weighed right in my hands, because it had the specific gravity of something that knew where it had been and was not pretending otherwise. I sat back down on the bunk. The thermos was on the shelf, empty now, still green, still weighted exactly the way he had chosen it to be. Nothing about it had changed. It was the same object it had been this morning and yesterday and 5 weeks ago when I put it on the shelf the first night and did not open it. Something else had changed. Outside, Hareth Station doing what it always did. Oreth somewhere in the building having sent me a 3-word message through the cadet system that said only numbers make sense. Preth having added my name to a meal hall seating arrangement under a heading, I suspected, he had created that afternoon because it had not been there before. Vethkara in his office writing 11 pages of careful and thorough recommendations because wrong data produced wrong conclusions, and he did not work with wrong conclusions. And in my file, somewhere in the coalition system, the colony designation of Kepler 9, low priority settlement, population under 200,000. A world with less sun. That made the most of what was available. I lay back on the bunk. My father used to say something after the hard mornings on Kepler 9, when the work was done and the gravity had done what gravity does, and the body was tired in that deep and honest way that comes from having actually used it. He did not make speeches. He did not summarize or reflect or draw conclusions. He just looked at the morning and what had been done in it and he said, "There it is." That was all, meaning the work, meaning the weight, meaning you did the thing and the thing is done and now you can rest because it is complete and does not need anything more from you tonight. I set it to the ceiling. There it is. The room held it for a moment. Then it let it go. In the morning, there was a revised training program posted from Vethkara, recalibrated for a colony standard human body with accurate baseline measurements. There were forms to complete for the arena repair. There was a second meeting requested by the administrative office about the intake protocol changes. There was a message from a Kethel cadet I had not spoken to before who said he had watched my evaluation and had questions about training technique and would I be willing to talk. There was more work. I was looking forward to it. I got up. I put on my hand wraps. I went to the bay.